We're back. I'm Natalie, and I'm here with my co-host, Kari. Today, we've got another quirky episode of Instinct, the podcast about leadership, one animal at a time.
We've done our best to make sure we're featuring a range of species across the animal kingdom, but we'd be remiss to have an animal podcast for business leaders and not include the cheetah.
Right. And the cliches are indeed relevant. Every startup wants to be the fastest land animal in the business world. We've all heard the saying, move fast and break things. But actually, these big cats have a lot more to offer us than speed.
In this episode, we'll explore what cheetahs have to teach us about staying focused on a single strategy for a long time and why consistency and pragmatism are both core leadership skills.
Let's get started. And by the way, Kari, I can't believe you didn't even notice my sweater. Hey, Kari.
Hi, Natalie.
How are you? Since we last chatted.
I feel like we've been chatting a lot recently, but what I will say is that we've been chatting so often that in between our chats, I have not had enough time to go get a cheetah outfit, which was part of my intention for today.
Wow. So I have multiple cheetah print paraphernalia, and I decided to not do it, to not wear them, because I felt like it was too much. So I decided to go for these earrings, which felt cheetah adjacent. You can barely see them. But I thought I had the same thought. But I'm glad I didn't one-up you.
You certainly did not one-up me, because even my earrings are not cheetah adjacent. But I'm also really curious about this too muchness. Could you just say more about that?
What did I even say? I said
that you thought it would be too much to wear your cheetah paraphernalia.
Yeah, well, I think so. I was thinking about the other animals that we have talked about so far. And I don't have any paraphernalia or clothing that represents like a manatee or a hummingbird. So I felt like it would be taking a stance about like who I am or which animals are worthy of having their prints adorned on my body. And I didn't yet feel that I could take that stance personally.
Are you not saying, but kind of saying that you're a bigger cheetah fan than you are a manatee fan?
I think I'm saying that the world of fashion seems to think that cheetahs are better than manatees. And so the textiles available to me for purchase tend to err on the side of cheetah versus manatee, so I think there's like a global appreciation of the cheetah over the manatee. Yes. But I'm not sure if I personally believe that. So I wanted to opt out of that.
Fun fact. I have never owned any cheetah print anything.
What about that fact do you think is most fun?
Well, I find it to be interesting because you're holding yourself back from wearing cheetah print because it's like somehow the world kind of like told you should wear cheetah print, but you're not sure that it really metaphorically represents your affinity for cheetahs. And I just thought I couldn't even do that if I wanted to.
Well, you really can.
I could go buy some cheetah print things.
Yeah, there's like so many ways that you could become part of this zeitgeist if you so desire.
I did have a thought about fashion when I was researching cheetahs, though, and I'd like to run it by you.
All right, I'm ready.
Also, I hold you in really high esteem as a very fashionable and crafty person. So tell me what you think.
Great.
Okay. Did you do any research on the king cheetah?
No, but I have just heard that there's like a couple different species of cheetahs, and the king is maybe a subspecies of an African cheetah or something like that. Tell me about it.
I don't know a ton about it, but I think that it's actually kind of like a rare, even kind of expression of a subspecies of cheetah.
Okay.
But the thing that really struck me is that the king cheetah's stripes they're stripes. They're not like little dots.
I did hear about that.
And it's very kind of black and grand, and the markings on the face are so dramatic. And my fashion thought about that was, if that was what we called cheetah print, I would 100% wear that.
Okay, so which part of my fashion expertise would you like me to start with?
Well, I would like first a commentary on how come we chose as a society to get really interested in the dot cheetah print versus what I think is like a really amazing kind of rarer and like more interesting expression of cheetahs. So curious about that. And then also just curious about if you saw a picture of the king cheetah, what you think.
Okay, well, so far, my expertise isn't going very far because I don't know why society likes that. But I do wonder. I'm going to look up the king cheetah right now. And I want to see if it... Right. Ooh, very cool. It's a bit like tattooy. Yeah. My guess is that sort of more linear stripy thing is... one, too similar to animals that we don't associate with a cheetah, like a zebra or something. And two, that it's much easier to make textile tessellation with contiguous patterns, maybe. So maybe it's just cheaper to produce. I don't know. But I think I might... So there's a lot of great software now where you can like upload images and make it into fabric. So I'm thinking... for your next birthday, which is a year from now, I will print out some king cheetah fabric and I'm going to make you a king cheetah jumpsuit of your dreams.
I love it. I love it. I will definitely wear that. I saw somewhere that they called it the Elvis of cheetahs.
What does that mean?
I think that Elvis is very stylish, or was very stylish. Or showy, maybe? I don't know.
Showy.
Maybe showy.
Okay, so we're talking about cheetahs today. And, you know, as we've done before, I'm kind of just curious to start where your feelings are about cheetahs. What was your starting state of your opinion about cheetahs before you did some research about them?
I want to answer a different question. So just because I think that I came in with this idea that we wanted to look at cheetahs because you and me work a lot with startups, small businesses, with leaders. I work a little bit less with people in kind of corporate jobs. But so I think a lot about speed, and a lot of my work is with people who are trying to do things really fast. And a couple of the companies that I've worked with also kind of wanted an animal. If they chose an animal to represent them, they've chosen a cheetah.
Like out of thin air.
Yeah, they're like, if we had to choose an animal that represents our company, we would choose a cheetah because they're the fastest.
Right.
And so I think that I kind of had this idea of like, well, cool, like what is it as startup leaders that attracts us to be like the fastest animal? There's like a face valid thing there, which is like, well, we want to be fast. But if we really start to like dig into like what's going on with the cheetah, and I'll tell you like my opinion on cheetah as I did more research, I was curious to see, like, does that metaphor kind of hold up? Like, as a startup, would we actually want to be like a cheetah?
Right.
And so, like, is the thing that we want actually the thing that we need in order to be successful? Is kind of a question that I was rolling around in my head as I was reading more about cheetahs.
When you ask startups that you work with to pick an animal, which itself is a cool idea, they choose often the cheetah. There's a speed element that I'm hearing. Is there any other sense you have of why people are drawn to that?
Well, I was recently at this retreat and all of us got an animal. And this is my hypothesis about this, but I was noticing that there were certain animals where all of us were like, oh, lucky, you got the orca whale. Like, lucky, you got the bald eagle. Or you got the cheetah, right? There's like some animals that somehow our society, kind of like the whole cheetah print thing, like why don't we have manatee print pants? I mean, I guess they would just be kind of leathery. I don't know. there are some animals that are just like fascinating to humans. And I think they're often like the most or like the most of something or different than something else or weird or perplexing to us, like our novelty seeking brains.
It almost feels like we adopt the hierarchy of, or some sort of hierarchy where like the bald eagle is better than we are at flying. But since we'll never be good at flying, like we can just admire it, versus the cheetah is like super, super fast and we could be faster in some ways in our lives. And so maybe we should like try to adopt more speed. Like we can kind of either have power over something or respect it because we're not in the same power structure as that animal.
Yeah, there's some sort of like exceptionalism thing going on too, like we're exceptional. I also wondered, are all of the favorite animals actually predators? Can you think of a non-predator animal that people are obsessed with?
Are koalas predators?
To eucalyptus trees, I suppose.
But then all animals are predators to something, right?
Well, I was thinking like everyone's kind of into alpacas and stuff these days, but like I think of the classic animals that people kind of are obsessed over, maybe like golden retrievers.
Yeah, some domesticated dog. Okay, so let's come back to the startup thing. So, you work with startups. A lot of them choose the cheetah as an iconic embolism. Nope, that's a different word. Iconic. What's the word I'm looking for?
Like an emblem or a symbol?
Emblem or a symbol of how they'd like to be or how they'd like to operate.
Yeah.
So let's get into the cheetahs and see if they live up to that standard or not.
Yeah.
What'd you find?
Well, okay. The first thing is the whole thing about speed. And you tell me what you found in your research. I mean, sure, they're fast, right? They're the fastest, basically, but they pretty much only get up to their peak speed for 1 or 2 seconds at a time. And their speed is actually not at all the most important skill that they have in doing the most important thing that they do, which is hunting. It's kind of not even their most important tool.
What do you think is their most important tool?
So they are probably more likely to be kind of like quiet, camouflaged, and like run consistently, at a moderate speed. Those are kind of the tools they use for hunting that I found. I don't know. What did you find about that?
About the speed and the hunting bit? Yeah. I think a couple things. The first is, yes, they are the fastest land animal. So shout out to cheetahs for that, winning that race. And they, in order to gain that title, have had to adapt basically speed over every other quality. And that includes they're not particularly strong. That includes they're not particularly high endurance, like you're talking about. Their level of resilience seems very, very contextual to the other animals around them. So I was reading about how, like, even when they do make the kill in hunting, they usually don't even eat all of the animal that they've just killed because other animals will come and steal the kill quickly. So they basically do kind of like an 80-20 rule. And they're like, okay, I got good enough meat there. And then like, I'm just going to sort of leave the rest for the more apex predators because I would like to sort of like get in and get out. And so there's like a kind of lack of resilience to the context around them. They sort of like retreat really quickly too. So I think that speed is critical, but it has come, it sounds like, with a lot of trade-offs. And I'm not sure about whether those trade-offs are ones I would pick if I were leading an organization.
I mean, on that note, I also was reading that cheetahs sometimes have to rest after that kind of peak exertion for sometimes up to an hour. And, you know, you think about like if you're running, you know, over 60 miles an hour and it's really cool and it's made you really famous among humans and people are making cheetah jumpsuits, et cetera, like that's really cool. But then every time you do something and you pull that lever, you have to rest, say like 2 seconds of fast running to an hour of recovery time in business terms is pretty rough.
Right. Especially as you're getting up to those peak speeds in like 1 to 2 seconds, you're talking about like an order of magnitude more rest than actual running, so to speak.
Exactly.
So what meaning do you make of that for startup?
I don't think that I could speak to every startup around like, would I pull the cheetah lever to like get going into the world? But, as I'm thinking about what makes a cheetah successful and what maybe puts a cheetah at risk, I would say using speed as your one and only is probably not the right move. That's the thing that actually puts the cheetah at most risk.
Have you seen folks do that and sort of flop from having chosen that one lever?
Yeah, I mean, like I started the company and the project that I work on now out of the experiences that I heard from entrepreneurs who had all gone through burnout. And as I was reading about the cheetah rest cycle, I was like, oh, it's like a microcosm of what happens at a larger scale around founder burnout in particular, but I think also company-wide burnout. And so, yeah, I think I have seen that happen. And you hear the trope, I think, especially around San Francisco, it's a marathon, not a sprint, in regards to business. But most founders I work with kind of come out of the gate sprinting.
I think the reason for that, a lot of the founders that I work with, they're early stage startups, right? And often they have decided to start something because there is some inflection point in the market where something is now possible that wasn't possible before. We're at one of those right now with like generative AI, for example. And so speed to market is actually pretty important, right? Like being able to actually put something in front of people and get responses about it and iterate on it quickly and actually do that cycle is, I would say, like pretty critical to existentially, do you exist as a company or not? So if we were to give some advice based off of that, of like what we've seen, like, I don't know where on that, spectrum I would necessarily encourage people to be, because that is also a reality that like you don't really exist if you aren't bringing things to market quickly.
And maybe it's the thing that if we were to look at the life cycle of a company as the life cycle of one kill for a cheetah. So if we're going to, I know the timescales don't really make sense, but if you got to choose, your 1 or 2 seconds to hit your peak speed within the entire sort of trajectory of your company, when would you choose to pull that lever? And like, what would be the other super amazing skills that you might pull in for all of the other times? I think that's kind of an interesting question, which is like, cool, we have this superpower in our back pocket, but we also have all sorts of other things that we can use.
Right.
Like being sneaky and having cool spots that make us look like grass, etc.
I like that point of, if you think of, or if one thinks of leadership as a set of tools that you can kind of pull out in different contexts or for different means or ends, then cheetah is one tool rather than an entire way of existing as an organization.
Well, and for example, you hit a Series C and you're still using cheetah as your major tool and you're not using manatee tools, we're talking a lot about manatees. So we'll just have to make sure that everybody goes back and revisits the manatee episode to understand. But, the manatee superpower of, say, delegation is super important as the company grows. And being, a lone female cheetah hunting, maybe not your best tool, as the company grows. But at a pre-seed, pre-Series A, Series A, even through a Series B, yeah, you better have a cheetah tool in there somewhere.
So we've talked about speed. What are some other properties, attributes about cheetahs that you've learned that you think are cool and relevant for leadership?
Well, I don't know if I have a conclusion on this, so I'm gonna say it and then throw it back to you. So we started maybe this project thinking that the organization, like the social organization of animals, would be really interesting in teaching us how we might socially organize companies. And I find the social organization of cheetahs to be fascinating, and I kind of don't get it.
Wait, let me tell you what I've learned about it, and you tell me if it matches up with yours. So the social organization I heard about is that for the most part, the female cheetahs are solitary and they don't really hang out with other cheetahs very much. They, of course, mate and then they take care of the baby cheetahs. But they also like disperse and find new ranges of land to kind of live in and kind of own that area. And then you have these male cheetahs, and they can be solitary, but also tend to organize in what's called a coalition, which I think is a dope name for a group of male cheetahs, and tend to also be brothers often. So like biologically tied, not just by their sex. And they're pretty small though. So 3-4 cheetahs per coalition, and they coalesce in order to improve their hunting outcomes and kind of work together on hunting. But they also have some social bonds and sort of like bro out together and take care of each other and like decompress. So it's not just the hunting that they're doing in groups. So those are the two paradigms I kind of saw. How does that line up with what you researched?
That's exactly what I find interesting. I'm also fascinated by if you could imagine what a cheetah bro out session looked like. What is it that cheetahs do to bro out?
So I listened to this excellent podcast, which we can link to for my cheetah researcher. And she was describing that essentially they kind of like groom each other and cuddle up on each other in their downtime and kind of just like lounge in a cheetah puddle with each other. And that it's actually quite like, I think that they called it, positive masculinity, which I think is hilarious because here we are sort of assigning more things to animals as like, this is a toxic masculine cheetah versus a not toxic one. But nonetheless, that's the image I got through this excellent researcher whose podcast I listened to.
Which is, it's kind of interesting to me because there are some human societies that organize a little bit more that way than, for example, we're in the United States, and I don't often see men actually or metaphorically grooming each other or creating a cheetah puddle. It's a little less acceptable,
right,
for men to be that way with each other than it is for women.
And certainly organizationally, the equivalent of a kind of like male-run coalition of leaders. We see a lot of those. You and I probably work with a lot of those where there are quite a few men at the top of the leadership rung. And yet I would not classify the predominant attribute of those groups as coalition.
Right.
I would mostly say competition, even amongst. And I certainly would not say like it's a leadership cuddle puddle. So, but you were starting this by saying like the social organization you thought was really fascinating about cheetahs. So now that we know a little bit about it, what about it sticks out to you or find interesting?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, and I guess maybe I'll wrap in this other thought that I was having around human organizations. I studied chimpanzee behavior for just a small little moment of my life in Zambia. And Zambian society actually looks a little bit more like cheetah society.
Mm-hmm.
And men kind of hang out together and have drinks and ride their bikes around. And women also live in communities, but often kind of raise children without the support of men, right? Or their fathers. Sometimes can be on their own, kind of like enterprising, working and supporting themselves and their families. So I just found that kind of interesting. It's not, a model that I'm not used to. And I find it interesting somehow that the female cheetahs can keep it all together. Like that's the part that perplexed me. I was like, this like coalition thing sounds pretty sweet, but like, how are the lady cheetahs
eating
it together? Like they got to hunt these things on their own. they have to hold a territory and somehow keep all their little cubs.
I'm not sure,
Pups?
actually.
Pups? Cheetahs, that's the other thing. Like the feline, like canine thing, they're like a cusp animal, kind of. Yeah, I was like, how do they do it?
I don't know. And I too was wondering, like, when do they eat? Which is something, to be honest, I relate to. I think that for a long time, my own leadership or how I saw myself as a leader was like highly independent, can make anything happen on my own, can see a whole system around me and then know how to like operate within it. And there's like a lot of benefits to that. It's a very self-empowered and self-efficacious way of going about the world. But it also meant that sometimes I like could not tell whether I was hungry or needed to sleep because I had to, or some parts of my body had to kind of like dissociate and check out in order to just like get all the things taken care of and done. And over time, I've like really had to become more male cheetah in a way, which is like recognize that I need to sometimes have a cuddle puddle of like people around me that are going through the same thing and like chill out a little bit. And then also be like strategic in how I'm going to do the things with like a shared goal rather than like assuming I have to be kind of a lone cheetah girl.
Yeah, that sounds like your next band that's emerging with like a 90s kind of bent to it. Yeah, and I'm recognizing that I have a bias. And like the animals that kind of do stuff alone, I'm kind of like, why? Like it's like lesser evolved or something. I have this judgment in my head.
Oh, and I'm like, relatable. I love that for you.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I'm definitely relating to the other part of the female cheetah, which is like, oh, I have to do it all.
Mm-hmm.
I have to have the job and the territory and do all the killing on my own and also raise the children. And then like every now and again, all the male cheetahs are going to come into my territory, circle around me.
Cheetahs have to have a lot of babies because the mortality rate is very high. And so they have a lot of babies in order for some of them to survive because, you know, how are these babies going to survive if their mom is also like out trying to feed herself and all of them and like needs to leave them alone for a little while. But immediately when I read and heard about that, some part of me kind of lit up because I can really relate to the idea of when you're starting something, you often need to put out 1,000 things because many of them will not survive. And so one element of the cheetah that I was like, yes, we need more of this orientation in organizations at most stages is the birth of many ideas and the non-attachment to any one of them sort of surviving, but recognizing that like we need it enough that one or two or three probably have legs and can be like brought up into the next thing. So what do you think about that?
I love that idea. Also, if I was going to call someone to help advise me on what being innovative and creative was, I would call you. And so I really pull down that insight as coming from the expert's mouth. It also made me think, though, it's so different than the way that, say, humans treat their young. My friends who are having kids, you know, it's the exact opposite of that, right? Every child is so precious. Not even just to keep them alive, but make sure that they have the exact right outfit and, you know, the right set of toys and all the right experiences and all those things, right? It's like, but if you're so precious with your one idea in a startup, like that kind of framework that maybe we have, and some people call their startups their babies, right? It's like, if you just take the framework that we have and place that on your metaphorical business baby, that might not actually be the right frame. Like maybe we should think more like cheetahs when it comes to business babies.
Right. And I mean, the more we talk about these animals and how they relate to organizations or don't, the more I keep just seeing like spectra of choices, right? So for the cheetah, we have this like speed versus endurance, I'll just say spectrum. Yeah. And then we also have this like multiplicity or like generativity versus focus spectrum that I see with a lot of my clients, that depending on what stage they're at, depending how big the organization is, depending on a bunch of factors, kind of like constantly oscillating between like, should we focus now that we have some traction here, or should we like stay broad and more generative and see what else is out there? And I think that's such a subtle and difficult choice to have to make and have to make, like, sort of respond to. I always feel sort of a deep admiration towards the leaders that I work with who can kind of swing to the other side after they've been in one mode for a while, because I think that requires a lot of bravery and also a lot of like, it's a completely different way of operating, right? You're talking about like human rearing versus cheetah rearing. Those are totally different models of care and also long-termism, right? Yeah. So I just think it's a hard choice. It seems so wrong to me to say like the right thing to do is to be a cheetah and like put more ideas out into the world. It's like, well, it depends.
Right. It depends. Yeah. And another spectrum that we talked about a little bit already in this conversation was kind of individualistic versus collectivistic, right?
Right. Or solitary versus coalition based.
Yeah, exactly. And even within cheetahs, the different models, right, are leaning into one or the other. And the males will kind of oscillate between the two, which like maybe they also have that kind of flexibility and range in some of those areas. The same with speed, right? They don't always use their speed.
Yep.
They seem expertly to lean into it when it's needed.
There's one other thing I wanted to name from my research, but I'm curious before I take us there, like any other threads you want to pull on that we've already put on the table?
No, I'm super fascinated to hear what you have next.
So I'm kind of a little bit obsessed, way more than I thought I was going to be, with cheetah morphology, as the experts call it, which is like how their bodies are constructed in order to enable the things, their behaviors, and how they operate into the world. And I just want to name a couple of them because I guess maybe child me is like, this is so cool and just wants to say them. But I also think that there's some implications of them. So the first one that I think is so fascinating about the body shape and construction of a cheetah is their claws.
Yes.
So unlike other cats and felines who have retractable claws, the cheetah has semi-retractable claws, which enables it essentially as it's running to gain traction and leverage, almost like soccer cleats on the ground, in order to then be able to move faster. And I think that this is such a small, or like seems like a small shift from like retractable to semi-retractable, but I actually think it's pretty profound because I think it highlights for me that where there is leverage, something is to be gained. And for cheetahs, they leverage that for speed. But I don't think that it has to be for speed that one chooses to leverage something. I think it's just a really interesting question to say, where, based off of the sort of shape or makeup of my organization, do I or we have leverage? Like, what is the semi-retractable claw of your organization that gives you leverage? So that's the first one. I'm like, that's dope. I love cheetahs for their semi-retractable claws.
Can I pull on that for a second?
For sure.
Also, I think I have a greyhound story that I'm just going to share at some point here, because cheetahs are actually most similar in their morphology to a greyhound.
Oh, that kind of makes sense. They have that really lean body with the long tail, the face structure that's kind of different from other dog cats.
Right. Yeah. The dog, like, is it a dog or is it a cat? I don't know. Somewhere in the middle. But also, if you see a picture of a cheetah running and their legs are totally overlapping, right? The back ones in the front and the front ones in the back. And it's the same as the greyhounds when they're running.
Cool.
Anyway, fascinating. But as you were saying that, I was also thinking about a challenge that I think I've gone through in my business, which is at the beginning of the business, I would say we had fully retractable claws. And we were constantly adapting and changing what we were doing. And it made us move kind of slow. Like, sure, we were perfectly adapted for whatever moment that we were in. But in terms of like moving the whole of the organization forward and at any type of speed, we weren't really ready for that. And I see this with our clients too all the time, right? Like as you zone in on product market fit, it's almost like you put those claws in place because you know now where you're going. Right. And then you're actually built more for speed, literally, right? Like, but as you're always adapting or changing the use of your claws, it slows you down. But it's that same sort of spectrum, right? Of like how rigid or flexible are we going to be, and like which thing are we actually orienting around, right? To be perfectly specialized or to be kind of, more at scale, or like ready to run fast.
Heads up, you're hitting your this, so it's creating like some boomy. So just be mindful of it. Totally. And I think that it doesn't have to be that you, like I said, you have particular clause and specific things, right? Like I think the nudge that I am inspired by for myself and others is like, know where you have leverage. And if you're really early on, maybe for your organization, the biggest leverage was actually more generativity, so that you could like see what was out there and be able to like look at the whole system, because you're such a systems thinker, before then honing or deciding what direction to go, right? So like knowing your leverage feels like a superpower that the cheetah sort of evokes for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Okay. I have second morphology point.
Okay.
Next favorite morphological feature of the cheetah is that they have this really long tail, which sort of acts as like a rudder, sometimes referred to, or just also like gives them kind of directional compass, so that they can also shift very, very quickly direction. And the cool thing about that is that if you actually watch them run, that their head, despite the rest of their body being extremely flexible with their spine that kind of contracts and is and releases like very fluidly, their head stays exactly in place. Like it doesn't move with the rest of their body, which has such maybe cliche but obvious implications for me in a business context, which is like, again, rigidity versus flexibility. The cheetah has both at its peak form. It has body flexibility so that it can adapt quickly, but its head is like super stable and eye on the prize, right? It's stable so that it can focus on where the animal is that it's trying to kill. And I think there's so much to be gained in wisdom from that, of like, I see a lot of founders kind of like looking to the left and looking to the right, particularly to see like what's happening in the market at the expense of like the eye on their prize that they've identified, and trusting that their organization has built enough flexibility to be able to pivot at the right moment if the target moves.
Yeah. It's almost like your vision, the way you operate against your vision, is the head of the cheetah. Your strategy is like the rudder tail, and your execution is like the feet on the ground and the flexible spine. And if you could have all three, then I don't know, you could hunt like a cheetah.
If you were to make some broad, sweeping, terrible generalization, which I'm going to force you into, of like, you're a Series B company, you found some market fit, you're starting to grow, you're starting to scale. Between the head, the tail, and the feet on the ground, where do you see most organizations that you work with flounder?
Tail.
Okay, tell us more.
So I think by time product market fit has been locked in, probably folks are so grateful for it that there's this laser focus that's happening. Now, it doesn't happen for all of us. And I will say I'm definitely like a head on a swivel kind of a cheetah. So I'm the one who's like frolicking in the flowers on the left while like, someone else is like out to get the antelope or something. So I'll just call myself out that I'm the frolicking cheetah. So there are definitely leaders who I've worked with who have that. But I would say that the ruddering of the tail, I think, becomes much more complicated at that point. So when you're throwing stuff up against a wall, like we said, like the major strategy and fine tuning is really around just do stuff and do it fast and learn a lot. And I think the strategy becomes much more complicated and subtle. And, I was just thinking about watching a cheetah run, and like, it really does just kind of like, it's subtle, right? The movement and the strategy and the fine tuning that happens. And if it changes all the time, then the head will move, right? Like they're all connected, right? This is part of one body. So like you can't just kind of like throw stuff up against the wall when it comes to strategy or your operations or the way you coordinate all your systems together. If you change that all the time, it'll also cause the head to move side to side, right? You're going to join me in the flowers over to the left. So that's where I see, especially around a Series B, I think the biggest challenges is like finding consistency in that fine tuning.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I kind of see the feet on the ground as like the team that you're building who's responsible for going and executing on where you're headed. And then often the C-suite or some executives are sort of like responsible for the head of like where we're headed and why. But then there is this like missed in translation or sort of a lack of the tail. And I think that often lands on the shoulders of middle managers who really like are doing their damnedest and their best that they possibly can to steer the ship based off of information from the rest of the body. It also reminds me though that even when all three of those bits are connected and operating at peak, the effective kill rate for cheetahs is still something like, I don't know, 25% or something like that. Like this is not like 100% likelihood that they're going to make the kill. And then remember, again, once they've made the kill, they can't even enjoy all of it because like someone else is coming. And is that not such a perfect analogy for what it's like to start a business in a wild climate like the one that we're in? So I also want to just give some grace to founders and executives and middle managers and the feet on the ground employees, because even if all those things are coordinated, that doesn't guarantee success.
Well, and then there's this other thing going on with cheetahs. You know, I think a lot of the animals we've been looking at are kind of in the endangered or vulnerable status. And like the thing is, if you are really focused on what you're up to, that you do miss also some context, right? Or if you're really specialized, you also miss the ability to adapt and evolve. And there's a trade-off there as well. You know, I think as the world changes, like we might not be able to run as fast as cheetahs as humans, but we are really good at adapting. And kind of having our heads up and noticing what's going on. Now, you know, climate change notwithstanding, like we have adapted fairly well. And so, you know, I also wonder about like there's something really beautiful also about startups being kind of fleeting. They exist in a moment in time, and at some point they either graduate to something else, which becomes more enduring, or they teach us something in society, or they break open a new path for other companies to come in, or they become absorbed into other ideas and companies. And like there's something kind of for a moment in time about the folks we work with too.
Yeah, the composting cycle of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Kari, can I put you on the spot for a second and ask you a question about your company?
Yes.
So if you think back to the many years you've been working on this, when would you say you needed more cheetah energy in your leadership? And when were you like, yeah, I killed that? That was like perfect cheetah moment.
When did we need more cheetah energy? And when did I use the cheetah energy at the right moment?
Yeah.
So I'll start with the second question first, because that just popped into my head. So as you know, we work holistically with leaders in startups. So in a systems thinking and also like an interdisciplinary kind of approach, thinking about multiple aspects of people's lives and companies' existence. And that approach was starting to become popular. We started about a little over 5 years ago. It was starting to become popular. Like we're starting to kind of see these things pop up in various aspects, especially in kind of the West Coastal cities. But then the pandemic hit, and it was like, we are ready to rock.
Wait, say more about that. Like, what are people seeing in the pandemic that brings more desire for an integrated approach?
Well, I started getting calls from VCs who are saying, our founders are struggling. And they finally got this thing that we'd been beating a drum about, which is like our personal lives and our business lives are intertwined as founders. Like they're often completely enmeshed. Like our mental health is our leadership health. What happens in the business is mirroring what's happening inside of ourselves, and the way we relate to ourselves is the way we relate to others, right? We're trying to show this parallel, and the sort of extreme nature of the pandemic made it obvious that when founders were suffering in their personal lives, they were also suffering in their business. And when their business was suffering, they were also suffering in their personal lives. And it just made it so we didn't even have to have that conversation or educate folks.
Mm-hmm.
So getting calls from investors saying, like, how do I help my founders navigate through this time? How do I help them meet a moment of uncertainty with clarity and focus? Right. And I was like, well, that's the thing, right? We've been talking about this.
Mm-hmm.
And so it became obvious, and it also became necessary. And leaders also came to us saying, like, our teams are suffering. Like, we don't know how to help them cope through this time.
Mm-hmm.
So we probably in the course of 2 weeks tripled our business.
Wow. It almost sounds or reminds me of when there's these seemingly sudden shifts that are actually the culmination of a greater cultural shift happening. And I'm kind of getting the same vibes of like the past 20 years in the just therapy industry in general. Yeah. I mean, I cannot tell you a single person in my generation, I'm a millennial, like a solid mid-millennial, like not a geriatric millennial, not a cuspy Gen Zer, who refers to their therapist as a shrink.
Right.
Right. And there's something that shifted in how we referred to therapy alongside a cultural shift about how we think about the role of therapy in our lives and how we talk about it with the people we know. It's just a complete shift. And I almost get that sense of like the pandemic seemed like this moment in which people then were bought into the idea that who you are outside of work as a founder is enmeshed with who you are professionally, except that probably we're on some greater cultural trend happening. That's what I sense or see, where we're getting more accepting of the fact that we are porous human beings that can't just shut ourselves off very easily and compartmentalize different aspects of our life. And if and when we do that, it tends to come with consequences that then show up in kind of back-assward ways later. So it almost feels like that happened for y'all in the pandemic. Does that resonate?
Yeah, totally.
So you brought the cheetah energy in that moment. You just sort of like were able to kind of see the prize, and other people could see the thing you were going after too in a different way.
Yeah, and it gave me confidence. I mean, with the semi-retractable claws, like it gave me some confidence to say, like, I'm going to leave those claws out, right? Like, actually, I think now the world is reflecting back to me in particular and our business that like something that we've been doing and talking about now has traction, and like being able to dig in on that was really helpful. Now, I don't know if this answers your first question, but at the beginning of the business, we were doing the spaghetti up against the wall thing a lot. Like I had a really clear vision of what I wanted to create, but it was probably for a world that didn't quite exist yet. And I kind of think I was doing like top speed cheetah running, but like in 2 seconds in every direction. And it was completely exhausting. So I don't know if we needed more cheetah energy there, but I was thinking about the way that they move into speed and then move back and know how to expertly kind of throttle up and throttle back. And I could have used more of that discernment at the beginning of the business, for sure.
Right. You're making a distinction, I think, between speed against one object versus speed in every direction. Which just looks like total chaos and for sure can lead to burnout.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing this.
Did you want to answer that question for yourself?
You have to re-ask it so that I can hear it anew.
Well, and maybe I'll ask it. I also think it's sometimes fun when you tell a little personal story. So I'll ask it broadly. It could be in your work or also in your personal life. When have you used the cheetah skills expertly and exactly in the right moment? And when did you either, as I answered it, misuse the cheetah skills, or you could have used more of them?
Yeah, it's very confronting. It's so much easier to be the one asking you to tell me that story than to own it myself. I'll say, I've been coaching for now, 7 or 8 years. And I would say that at the beginning of my coaching practice, I think I brought way too much cheetah energy.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that I would kind of get in the ring with people and be like, all right, what is it? What do you want to work on? Where do you want to go? Why do you want to go there? And like sort of laser focus. My head was like, I'm fully with you, dearest client. But energetically, I think that was like me moving really close and almost a way that like, I think it's almost like I'm going in for the kill and then I'm going to like tear you apart and we're going to like get into the meat of all the things. And some people are down for that. But I think the impact of that inadvertently can feel like you're sort of being shredded apart for the sake of like, getting to the innermost thing and then being like, all right, my work here is done. And I'm probably dramatically over exaggerating how it felt for the other people, but it's not. I have been told many times in my life that I can be very intimidating and that I can ask a lot of direct questions and that I can have kind of like a laser focus. And over time, I've had to recognize that even though some of that stuff comes from like the patriarchy saying that I'm too much and I don't really want to like soften myself for that, sometimes there is real impact of like the way that I'm approaching someone energetically. And that if I ignore that impact, I'm essentially saying like your experience doesn't really matter because who I am is who I am. And that is not the coach I think is effective, nor the coach I want to be. And so over time, I think I've gotten much more, male cheetah coalition cuddle puddle energy in my coaching and a lot more like, let me see what's happening in this field, literally and metaphorically, and then let me run alongside someone rather than they're the object that I'm chasing down. And then we're like, I'll have completed the killing or hunting cycle. Like that's not a good vibe. So that's the one that comes top of mind as sort of the evolution of my coaching practice. And that really that start of coaching, that energy, the cheetah energy for me came from a place of like wanting to do it right and wanting to accomplish it and wanting to succeed and wanting to make sure that, the person got what they paid for. Right. And I don't know if that was actually that long-term, that effective. Right.
And that's what an amazing insight, right? It's like you can run at top speeds. It's maybe your story is kind of similar to mine, and you can run in different directions or you can direct it at something, but it doesn't actually mean that you get further or that you kill more, right? That the cheetah skills have to be used with discernment, as do the leader's skills, and in kind of a combination, and maybe that flexibility along all of those spectrums actually, maybe that's secretly kind of what cheetahs are great at. It's like knowing when to use their superpowers and when to throttle back.
So cool. I'm feeling like more calm about the cheetah and more like in appreciation of, I don't know, its complexity just as like another creature in the world. And I do think kind of very full circle when I'm working with leaders, especially when I'm working with founders, together, like co-founders on their relationship, the best part of the work is usually like getting to appreciate the complexity of the situation and not trying to solve it. And I think so many people just need that version of the coalition to like have enough space to see the complexity and to not have to overly simplify or collapse it down and have it all just suddenly make sense. Otherwise, you're a bad leader.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Should we end there? Any last bits?
I have nothing more to say. Oh, no, I do. I have a fun fact for the end about cheetahs.
Great. Hit us with your fun fact.
Okay. The thing that I learned, and I was trying to come up with a quippy way to say this, but I'm just going to say it because I didn't come up with anything quippy, is that, did you know that their skin is also spotted?
No, but I heard that all of their spots are like completely unique. Like there's no cheetah that has the same markings as another cheetah. So anyway, that's unrelated to their skin. What do you make of that?
I think I was trying to say like, oh, their patterns go more than skin deep, but I was like, actually, they just go exactly skin deep. But
I'm not surprised. This is kind of where they skirt the cat dog blend, because I happen to know, for example, when my cat yawns first thing in the morning and exposes her whole mouth, it's spotted underneath the roof of her mouth. So I'm not surprised there's some skin pigmentation too for the cheetahs.
Makes a ton of sense. I just really liked that little fact. And I also love the idea that every little decoration on them is unique. And of course, that's true for all of us.
True. You did start with a fun fact that was you've never worn cheetah anything, and you've now ended with a fun fact, which is that cheetahs wear cheetahs even if they have no hair. Yeah. Thanks for joining this week's show. Credit to Zach and the team at Supermix for helping us make this show sound professional.
If you want any more deets on us, the podcast, or past episodes, visit us at instinctpodcast.com. There you can leave us a note or a review. We'd love to hear from you.
And of course, if you liked this episode, please subscribe everywhere, wherever you get your podcasts.
See you next week.